Hello and welcome to another episode of Mindful Meeting Podcast. I'm your host, King Abu. Today we'll be chatting about a topic that is very relevant to us all and that I'm very excited about. I believe it's a topic that we all, or something that we all yearn for. And even when you look at the Noble Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that chapter 30, verse 21, Allah talks about that He will place between a couple, mawadda and rahma. So today we get to talk about love, dating, spousal selection, and much more. And I'm even more thrilled to have an amazing guest with us today who is not only highly intellectual, but passionate about this very topic as well. Our special guest today is Sister Marzia Hassan. Brace yourself, guys, because this bio or resume is lengthy, but wow, quite impressive, right? So, Sister Marzia Hassan is an author. She's a public speaker and a marriage and family therapist, working with individuals, family members, and couples. After starting her own family, she realized that her true passion is empowering. Is empowering and strengthening families to create intentional and healthy relationships. Marzia now works as a social worker and relationship consultant with individuals, couples, and families. After obtaining her master's in social work from the University of Toronto, she started Family Connections International. It's a psychotherapy practice based in Toronto and online. Having lived, studied, and experienced life on three different continents, Marzia combines Western scientific thought and blends it in with Eastern spiritual wisdom to bring a unique and practical aspect to her work with families. In addition to providing counseling, Marzia facilitates various parenting, self development, and spiritually learning groups for youth, adults, and families all over the world, including US, Canada, Australia, and Europe and South Asia. She's also the author of three books. And finally, Marzia also publishes a daily blog called Daily Wisdom. Trust me on this one, you will love her daily wisdom because I receive it and read it every day, and I'm learning something new from her every day. I promise you, you'll find her very insightful. And she's also the host of the Family Connections podcast and the mother of three conscious young adults, leaving her now with an empty nest in Toronto. Marzia, I am both humbled and so honored to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
Oh,
Happy to
yes.
be here.
I'm glad you're here. It was lovely indeed. So, before we get started, I have a riddle for you. Are you ready?
Oh, okay. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. So, a doctor and a bus driver are both in love with the same woman named Sarah. The bus driver has to go on a long bus drive or bus trip that would last a week. Okay. So, before he leaves, he gives Sarah 7 apples. Why?
So he's gone for a week.
Yes.
Okay, maybe eat an apple every day. I'm not
Oh
sure.
my God, yes. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm terrible at riddle, by the way.
Oh man, you were on the
Okay.
right track. I thought you actually got it. Oh yeah, he was trying to secure his lady. Yeah, Allah. Okay, so I'm gonna throw a lot of stats in your direction, okay? So according to YouGov and eHarmony, within the first 3 months, men profess love to their partner, while women take about 4.5 months. And even more is that 39% of men say I love you within a month, while only 23% of women feel that way. Another survey that was published in 2017 found that 72% of men and 61% of women believe in love at first sight. All right. And psychologist and sex therapist Lauren Mercy explains that there can be a strong attraction at first sight, but romantic love for someone requires knowing who they are, the fullness of their character. So, with all that in mind, my first question to start this episode is the word love thrown around too loosely?
Mhm. Um, I think again, it comes back to how you define love, right? And love can be many different things to many different people. And as we know, there's many different kinds of love. So, for example, when we're talking about romantic love, yes, you can fall into infatuation quite quickly. You see someone and you're besotted with their looks, with quote unquote the chemistry between you. By the way they speak, something about them attracts you, and you can't stop thinking about them, right? And so this is definitely, it is infatuation, what experts call, or in another word we call it limerence, right? And
Limerence.
limerence is not what we in the field call real love. Why? Because it takes no effort. You know, it's effortless. It's something that happens to you. It requires no intentionality, and it's not. I mean, it's definitely a fact of human relationships that this does happen, and it's only the beginning, right? It's not what Hollywood and Bollywood would lead you to believe, that that's the end of it. You find someone with that kind of chemistry, and once you get married, that's the beginning of the happily ever after, right? And we know that real love is not like that. The feelings of love, they come and go, but the actions of love is what keeps love uh, nurtured long term. So that's a big difference, in what we call falling in love, which is unconscious, effortless sometimes in the beginning, and what we call standing in love. Standing in love means being intentional about it, um, doing what it takes. So loving actions as opposed to just loving feeling.
Some intentionally being doing actions. I love that. Speaking of love, a hadith that comes to mind for me is it's been reported that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said that marry who you love, don't love who you marry, don't marry who you love, right? So we all know that, like you were saying earlier, this Hollywood, Bollywood, and all the woods in the world depict this rosy fairy tale of what love is supposed to be. So my question is, does love actually come after the marriage or before, during the dating stage or getting to know each other stage?
That's a $1 million question. And whenever I say $1 million question, means that there's no easy answer to it,
Right.
right? So again, it really depends on how you define love. Love is not something with a universally accepted definition.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you enjoy spending time with someone? Absolutely. Can you feel comfortable with them? Can you have chemistry? All of these things are possible, right? And when you think of love as doing the best for the other person, sacrificing, committing yourself, having an investment, doing something for the other person, sometimes at the expense of yourself. If that's what you mean by love, then it definitely grows. It grows with time. But at the end of it, there's so much research out there now that a strong relationship is actually one of the best things you can do for yourself, better than giving up smoking, better than exercising, better than eating healthy. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what all the long term happiness research is showing, that the number one thing that you need, that you can do for your own happiness, is form strong relationships.
Wow. That's very profound. Inshallah, may Allah Almighty help us all to find those partners. So despite the many platforms that we have today, right, apps and websites designed or that offer matrimonial services, we still see lots of singles around the world, right? So why is this? Why are there so many challenges? Or what are the challenges these days of finding a spouse?
Um, okay. So there are, clearly many challenges in forming, so the way I look at it is there's actually three different challenges, right? The first is the challenge of finding somebody or finding a potential partner. The second challenge is obviously of making the right decision. So even if you meet somebody, that's not the end of the end of the road. You
Hmm.
actually have to see if that person is right for you. And the third challenge, even if you do find somebody who meets all the criteria, you still have the challenge of making a marriage last. And when I say last, I mean be in happy and stable at the same time. So those are the three challenges. And I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but in terms of the challenges of finding somebody, that that you could potentially settle down with, the first thing is that society is a lot more diverse today than it was. Our forefathers, before we were a diaspora, before we moved to Canada, for example. I'm talking about my own community. We all lived in a place where everyone was similar. We knew each other for generations. You saw each other at work, at home, in extended families. It was a much more homogenous community, right? And because of that, it just made it easier. You found people within your social circle, kind of thing. Now, living in the West, we know that people come from all over the place. So even if they share faith, they would have very different cultures. And Muslims today, we know, tend to be very much more polarized in religious practice, right? So there are people who are highly practicing, and then there are people who are not practicing at all, and most people fall somewhere in between, right? That's another challenge. Another challenge is that previously, like even a couple of generations ago, there were very clear norms, of what was expected of people, what they did, how they lived, how they worked, what age they got married, what they studied, and now not so much. So now everything is negotiable, right? How you choose to live your life, where you study, how you what areas you work in, and because of these reasons, obviously it is, although the pool has increased, we are exposed to more people in one sense, that we can find, but also to find someone from such a large pool somehow becomes more challenging. I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely, it does. Because when you have a lot of decisions or choices in front of you, it's hard to navigate through all of them, as opposed to when you have only few to select from, right?
Exactly. That's
Yeah,
very, very true.
yeah. So when we embark on this journey of finding this soulmate or a partner, right, and building this bond and establishing some sort of love, we start dating. I notice from my experience anyway that a lot of people date out of loneliness, or sometimes it's familial pressure, especially in the case of a girl, the biological clock is ticking, all of these things, right? Societal expectations. My question is, in your professional opinion or even personal, what should be the reasons or intentions of why we should get married?
Ooh, okay. I can tell you what are some not good reasons. And, if you are, getting married to somebody only because of social pressure, right? Only because your family is pressuring you to do that. That's not a good reason to get married. And the reason being that, anything we do has to be with choice. If we feel that we have no choice in it, we can't give it our all, or generally we don't. And I see way too many relationships not succeed, not because there's anything wrong with the people involved, but simply because they started out on the wrong foot. They have this baggage that I never wanted this. I only got because in the couple therapy world, we always start by reminding a couple who
Why?
have
Mm,
started out liking each other, right? So we take them back to that time, and let them tell their story. But what I find in forced relationships, they don't have that. They don't have that good feeling or the good memories to go back to. What they have is somebody pressured me. This person seemed like a okay guy, so I just said yes, or an okay girl, right? And that's, if it's not a bad thing to listen to your parents and start the search if you feel you're ready. And sometimes even if you don't feel you're ready, it's a good idea to listen to wisdom, right, from elders.
absolutely.
When you make the decision, though, you have to be very clear that it comes from your choice, right? People can influence you, they can say their bit, but at the end of the day, it's your life and you need to take responsibility. So please, too many times I see people ruining another life actually because they say, this wasn't my choice. I don't like you. I don't want you. I just did it because my mama said so. And, I'm not in this.
Yeah,
And those kinds of relationships are really heartbreaking. They're heartbreaking, actually.
absolutely. That really resonates with me because, especially the last part of when you said you can really, really ruin somebody's life, right? Because divorce is not something to be taken lightly, and it kind of really debilitate you and demoralize you. You know. Um, but in the beginning of a new relationship, there's this aura of the excitement, the happiness of getting to know someone for the first time. You're dating each other. You're trying to build this relationship, right? And we tend to sometimes wear rosy glasses and become very subjective because we get emotionally attached to them. So sometimes we don't see things objectively, right? Um, are there any warning signs that you would say, when you that kind of gives you the nudge to know that you're making a bad decision?
Okay, again, very good question. So, um, here's the thing. I'm really in favor of wearing rose colored glasses. Okay. I'm really in favor of wearing rose colored glasses after you're married. you know,
After,
After you are married, it's a wonderful thing to do, to
mm,
actually look at your spouse with all their positive qualities and not pay so much attention to their shortcomings, which we all
mm,
have.
right,
When we do that before, however, when you do that before really knowing them and before you get married, obviously you are setting yourself up for a lot of issues. Okay.
yeah,
So before you commit to someone, you really need to be realistic. You need to be realistic about who they are, what they represent, and what your challenges are going to be. And my standard advice to many couples is, please don't marry a project, right? So
mm,
if you see somebody and you think, okay, this person has potential, and here are the list of things that I'm going to work on changing, and then we'll be okay. And the bad news is that that's setting yourself up for disappointment, right? Because everyone changes, definitely, and people change on their own agenda, not on our agenda, right? So
absolutely,
if we think that, this is something I really don't like about the person and I'm going to change it, it is not a good idea. It's much better to be okay with who they are at that point.
mm,
And then, inshallah, of course, both of you will grow. But, it's never a good idea to have an agenda for somebody else's improvement, right?
absolutely.
Um, does that make sense? And we can obviously talk about warning, what are some warning signs, because they're definitely there.
Yeah, what are those warning signs?
So, you know, very often, again, when I meet couples who are in trouble, it turns out that it wasn't, sometimes people think, oh, why didn't I know this? This was, it was, like I had no warning, right? But actually, very often there are signs. There are definite what we call red flags, but because of maybe pressure or because of those rose-colored glasses, it's hard to see. And you miss them. You miss looking at things which are actually really important to look at. So, what are some of the warning signs of potentially difficult spouses? Okay. One is little insight or self knowledge. So whenever if I'm in trouble, I am always blaming somebody else. I never take responsibility for my stuff. I always think it's somebody else's fault. That's going to be an issue because no matter how much you try, there will be conflict in your relationship, right? And ideally, both people, as long as they do their part, they take responsibility for at least part of the issue, there's hope, right? You can work at it. But if one person just, is always blaming the other person, it's a challenge to live with them. Okay. Secondly, it's what we call poor emotional regulation. In other words, you just go by whatever feeling you have. You have no ability or very little ability to actually feel something and still behave in an appropriate way. So, for example, if you feel angry, you have just no ability to control that anger. You will express it in inappropriate ways, become violent perhaps, or critical, or whatever that is. Okay. So being able to regulate emotionally is a very important skill in relationships, because again, even if you're married to a saint, they will annoy you at times.
Of
That's
course.
just the reality of relationships. Okay.
Right.
So you need that ability to feel the annoyance, but not act out in an aggressive or a damaging way. Okay.
Excellent.
And then the third thing is, just really poor relationship skills, like not, having very little, like, for example, if a person has never had a long term relationship, and I don't mean romantic, I mean friendships, if they don't get along with family, if they have no other people in their lives that they are close to, or they can count on, and if they're like by now 25, 30, that's it's kind of a red flag, because if you've lived in a place for a long time, if you have extended family members, one can understand if you don't get along with one, two, or three people, right? But if you have poor relationships with everyone around you, that's a problem, and that's something that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, because you're the common denominator. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh yeah. I love the what you said. Don't marry a project. I love that.
Yeah.
I'll remember that because it's true. We try to change people. Like week or 2 weeks into the relationship, we're already giving them like a laundry list of things we should change about them. The marriage project. So we know that when two people decide to get married, both families are also involved. They're merging together, and they play a pivotal role both during the dating stage, if you will, and afterwards too, because they do become families after all, right? So I guess that said, my question is, how important is it to get to know the family of that potential spouse before making that big decision?
Oh, I would say it's extremely important, because one of the challenges that young couples have today is what we call incubator relationships. Incubator relationships means that, for example, if you meet somebody at university, both of you are away from home, and so you have your own little bubble. University is a bubble; it's not real life, right? And you meet somebody and you like each other, but you haven't really seen them interact with, you haven't seen how they work, you haven't seen their family relationships, you haven't, so you actually know very little about that person. Okay. And it's a good thing to ask questions, to do a little bit of investigation. And the reason why family is particularly important, and by the way, both Islam and science, they both recommend that that's one thing that you really do need to pay attention to, is the family background, because we learn everything from our families, and most of it is unconscious. So what it means to be a spouse, what it means to be a husband, a wife, a daughter, who shares power, who does what are the expectations, um, you know um, how to handle conflict, how to be kind to people. Most of this is learned consciously, right? Before we are conscious of it, we have already taken all of this in. So to get to know a family is tells you a lot about the person, right? And again, if you come from a dysfunction family, that's not your fault, right? Uh, and it's not the end of the game. So it doesn't mean that anyone who has, for example, one of the things that I would look at first is, how do the parents get along?
Mhm.
Because if the parents have a strong relationship, it's very likely that the person, the potential spouse, has picked up on some of that
Right.
unconsciously, what it takes to make a marriage healthy over long term. Now, what if they don't have that fortune? What if their parents can't get along with each other, right? It's not the end of the story, but the person needs to do some work. They need to figure out what they would like to do different, in their relationship, at least to recognize what's a healthy pattern and not a healthy pattern. So, for example, if someone has grown up with violence in the home, unless they've actually confronted that question and decided that this is actually not okay, they are likely to repeat it, right? So these are things that the person who doesn't have a strong family background, and when I mean by a strong family background, I mean a healthy functioning family, you need to learn from what went wrong and not repeat the same mistakes. And again, intentionality means that you actually decide what your relationship is going to be like, rather than slide, just drift into decisions, drift into a relationship, and make the same mistakes that were made. So so definitely there's a lot of hope. You need to do work, that's all. you know
Absolutely. Thank you. Slide instead of decide instead of slide. I like that. So we're speaking about families, right? And this is especially the case for the girls because generally in our culture, in our faith, men are considered to be the main breadwinners, if not the only breadwinners, right? So my question is, how important is money in the equation when seeking a spouse, right? Should you wait to quote unquote stand on your own 2 feet before committing to get married, or do you build an empire together from scratch? How does that work?
okay, so really good question. So here's the thing. Do you need to have some, do you able to at least be able to feed yourself before you bring a spouse into the picture? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And again, Islam says financial competence is actually one of the filters that you use in order to find a spouse. Okay. The problem is today that the standards of financial well-being have become so impossibly high that people are waiting for a long time to settle down because they think they cannot satisfy the needs of their spouse. And that's a really unhealthy, it's not okay on many different levels. First of all, let's just look at the stats. Married people tend to do better at work. They tend to do better financially. Why? Because they have support, right? There's somebody taking care of other things so that they can focus on work. Just if you look at it really in a very basic way. Okay. Secondly, and I think it's both the person who's expecting the high standard of living and the person who's feeling pressured. Both have a role to play in this. Okay. So to think, to have it all figured out, and to be like really well off financially in your early 20s, or mid 20s, or even early 30s when you're starting out, it's a tall order. It's a very tall order for young people, and it puts enormous pressure on them. And it's unnecessary pressure, right? So once you get married, there is nothing stopping you from doing better financially. That will grow. You don't have to start out by wanting everything. If you already have everything when you start out, what's your goal, right? What are you going to work
Exactly.
towards? So it's really not a good idea to have it as long as you have a job or some income
Right.
and you're able to feed yourself, have a roof on your head. It doesn't have to be like it could be just rental or whatever.
Hmm.
Again, it's the potential, right? If you have, and money is the thing that it comes and goes. So even if you have a great financial thing ahead of you, you could lose it all tomorrow, right?
Absolutely.
But if you have the ability to work hard, if you're motivated, you want to take care of yourself and your family, those things are lasting. Those are not easy to change. So if a person is motivated, they are hardworking, they have, they are studied, they've got some skill, then you'll be okay, inshallah, even if right now they're making very little money.
Indeed. I've never personally heard of any man who was trying to propose to a woman who didn't have his bills covered, so it just wouldn't make sense when you cannot even take care of your bills to look for a marriage. I think most of the time we are financially ready to settle down, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but from my observations anyway, I've noticed that a lot of the time it's probably stemming from the girl and or her family side to put this pressure on the man to provide a certain standard of living?
Sometimes, yes, I will, and I'm just talking about what I see, what comes in front of me. And of course, that's a skewed image. I understand because only the problems, right? People who are
Absolutely.
happily married don't show up in my office. Okay. So, yes, there is definitely a pressure from women in particular to marry into some sort of status, and very often it may not even be. It's just because it looks good. It looks good on Instagram. The wedding will be fancy, and you can post great pictures. And we've really lost the plot in some sense because those things. They have very little to do with actual happiness or well-being. It's actually really short-lived, and not. But the pressure is definitely there. We can't really deny that the pressure is there. And so I have a very good friend who's a jeweler, and she's always telling stories about how young couples, they come and the expectation is from the woman that she is going to get a 2 carat diamond. And I am stunned. What my friend tells me is that there is a lot of pressure, and she in fact often wants to tell, listen, don't put yourself under so much financial strain right from the beginning, right? Because the pressure to live up to something that you are not financially able to do, that's going to impact your marriage for sure, right?
Absolutely.
The stress of debt and of is going to add up quite quickly. And that's something that very often young couples, they don't recognize what they're taking on.
Absolutely. And then on top of all of the wedding expenses and the gifts and everything, then there's the dowry that unfortunately has become like a business transaction in today's time. So yeah, it's a very heavy responsibility on the man, I think. So in this era when instant gratification isn't even instant enough, right? Is it healthy? Because sometimes there's this FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And we want to date multiple partners at the same time, just so we can make the most informed decision. But that could also be taxing on your psyche emotionally and mentally. It's very draining. So, would you recommend multiple dating multiple partners, or just exert all of your energy and focus on one person at a time?
Ooh, okay. Depends how much you are into torturing yourself, because it's hard enough to make a decision when you are speaking. And when you say dating, I'm assuming you mean finding out about the person with the intention of marriage. Okay,
Absolutely, absolutely,
so that's hard enough. When you are speaking to multiple people at one time, you are amount of time, the stress and it's how will you make a decision. And again, what we often don't realize, that the dating world in the West, for example, or in situations where they don't have the same structure in place as faith-based communities who are focused on finding long-term relationships as opposed to just casual dating, it's very stressful. How do you decide? When you've met 20 people, or when you've been out with 20 people, you find you like some one thing about the other person and the second thing about the other person, and then your standards grow and grow because you want it all in one person, right? And that's there's uh, one reason why our grandparents' generation, and I don't even know if I want to say that, but one aspect of that was that they were only exposed to that one person. And so whatever they saw in front of them, they adjusted. They learned to love what was presented to them. Right. When we have so much choice, and when we are, meeting so many different people, obviously it's much more challenging. challenging on the psyche, on emotions, on everything, right? And of course, I mean, there's no going back. I don't say that we should go back to the previous century either. But definitely to be speaking multiple people at once is just adding to your own stress in the situation. So I don't really generally recommend it.
I love it. The question you asked in the beginning, it depends on how much you're into torturing yourself. I love that. Oh yeah, Allah. Okay, so speaking of this instant gratification, right? We get in the habit of sometimes rushing through the whole process and not taking a seat back and just observing the relationship and where it's headed, right? So we get into this habit of divulging information way too quickly, too soon, right? Especially from the beginning. So, how much should you disclose or share with your potential partner, especially when you come from a dysfunctional family?
Oh, okay. Um, you know, you can't really build intimacy or trust without being vulnerable, without divulging of yourself. So that's the first thing. Again, if you want to take the relationship, if you're serious about a person and you want to, get to know about the other person, you can't really get to know about the other person if you're not willing to disclose anything about yourself. Right. So it's
Yeah.
a two-way street, number
Hmm.
one. Number two, what experts suggest is that you should definitely pace a growing attachment. What I mean by pacing it is that you need time. You need to see people in different situations. So if you've met at university, just meeting them
Hmm.
at university, not good enough, right? Go visit their family, see, what their old friendships are, where they grew up, things like that. Okay. So this is what we mean by pacing a growing attachment. Once other things check out, only then do you up the intimacy, even emotional intimacy phase of the relationship, right? Now the second question, which is related but a little bit different, is my family's really messed up, and do I tell my spouse about this or not? Okay. And the big filter or the big criteria for this question is to ask, is how is this going to impact my spouse after we get married? Okay. So if I have a dysfunctional family, definitely it's going to impact them somehow. Especially if I'm the man and I have a dysfunctional family and my spouse is coming in to live with that family. Very often, what happens is young girls, they come into the family, they have no idea what they've signed up for, and it's off the charts. Okay. The in-laws have not spoken to each other in years. They live in separate bedrooms. They hate each other. They cannot, bear to be in the same room. Really, she should have known about what she was signing up for, right? So it's like a break of trust, not to disclose at that point. Okay. If I am living in the home with my siblings, my one sibling is schizophrenic, or they're bipolar, or they have some big mental health issue which actually impacts the whole family. It is how we live and how we adjust. It's fine, but the person who's coming into that family really should be aware of this. This is, again, if you don't tell the person, it's a breach of trust, actually, because it impacts their well-being directly. If my mother hates my spouse to be and is really against the marriage, that's something they should know. So that they can go into the relationship knowing what they are signing up for as best as possible, without being blindsided by something so major that they were not aware of, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we mentioned, I think, earlier that our forefathers got married for different reasons, right? It could have been out of respect, status, procreation, all these things, right? But in today's time, things are different. Women aren't financially as dependent on men as they were maybe 3, 4 decades ago. And then on the flip side, you have men who are now playing out roles that they wouldn't have played out 3, 4 decades ago. So the dynamics of the relationships and the roles are constantly evolving, right? And I think, in my opinion, this has led also to us being picky, both men and women, because we've also raised the standards, right? Like you mentioned earlier. So given this scenario or this predicament, what is your recommendation without lowering our standards and thus settling, but at the same time not being very picky and having ridiculous high standards? Where do we draw that balance?
Okay, interesting question. So I see a few different questions in that. First is the fact that women are not as dependent on men financially, and that is absolutely true. And it's actually one of the reasons why marriages are so fragile today. It's one of the main reasons, in fact. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it as a negative thing, but women no longer need to tolerate, which is what they were doing in the past. Let's face it, right? Women had very few options and they
Absolutely.
would stay in relationships which were not healthy, which may have been abusive.
Toxic.
And they stuck around because they had no choice. There was less social acceptance of divorce. Their families would not accept them in many ways, and they had no ability to make ends meet. Okay, so they stuck around. So marriages in the past were stable. They were not happy. They may have been miserable but stable. Okay. And what has changed today is because women have more options, they will no longer tolerate a relationship which is so one sided or which is abusive or which doesn't meet their needs. Now, none of this is bad. None of this is bad, right? So, should we, what is called upon actually, because what we say is that commitment, right? Very often people would say, oh, there's no commitment in relationships today and they're easy to break. Absolutely. But we are really misunderstanding what commitment is, okay? So, commitment is of two types. One is restraint and the other constraint, right? And the other is a dedication. So what we mean by constraint is, like, say you sign up, you sign up for a job where there's no out. You are committed to them for 1 year. Okay, and so it's a jail sentence. You may hate that. You may hate your job. You may hate what you're doing, but there's no way out. You've signed your soul for a year. Okay, that's constraint. Now, a dedication is, same job, you signed up for it, but you really work at it. You do professional development, you love what you do, you are motivated to go to work, and you are dedicated to making that the best experience you can. Okay. Both are commitment, but very different types of commitment, right? And so today, what's happened is that constraint commitment has gone way down, right? Because people, you don't have to stick around. you know if it's a terrible marriage, you have the choice to walk out. And by the way, Islam gave us that choice many years ago. Okay,
Hassan, thank you. Yeah.
so what needs to go up to keep the scales balanced is dedication,
Mm.
is to do things that make that relationship worthy of sticking around. And that, by the way, comes from both people, right? No longer can it be a one person job. No longer can it be that, very many women, even today, they're told that the reasons why marriages are not succeeding is because women have become very picky and women need to sacrifice and women need to self sacrifice. Why? This is not Islam. I mean, Islam, when you research it, the amount of emphasis that Islam puts on a man keeping the woman in his life happy is unbelievable. Unbelievable. So it's really, the time has come for men to up the standards. It's, I don't know how else to put it, right? Because yes, the pendulum has swung, and yes, women don't want, when they see what their mothers went through, they don't want
Yeah.
the same in their lives.
And they
And you
shouldn't.
can't blame them. You
Absolutely.
cannot blame them for not wanting a relationship which was so one-sided in some cases, not in all, by no means, right? But in some cases, and they don't want that.
I completely agree 100%. But do you think there's also perhaps a double standard? Because on one hand, Muslim women use Islamic text and literature to tell men that you are the breadwinner and you should be the provider and whatnot. But under the same breath, There are also Islamic texts, whether they're considered authentic or not, but they do exist, right? And those texts may tell a woman to play out a certain role within that dynamic of that relationship. But often I see the same Muslim woman who will use the Islamic literature to tell men what to do, while at the same time they wouldn't follow those texts because it doesn't suit them.
Okay. so so here's the thing. I think that kind of misuse is used equally by both spouses.
Agreed.
Equally. Okay. It's not and here's the thing, that in Islam, when you are dealing with God at the end of the day, right? And in life, if you focus on your role, on doing your part, that gives you power. That gives you some choice in your life, right? When you are focused on what the other person should do, how they should behave, and your focus is outside yourself, you have no power. No matter how much you try to act out in many ways, you have no power, because you have no power to change other people or to force them to do what they don't want to do.
Yeah,
Okay. So and both people definitely need to take responsibility for their action. In fact, in long time happy relationships, spouses, this whole myth that it should be 50-50 is actually a big myth. It's a myth that
absolutely.
causes a lot of hardship and heartache, because people think, oh, it should be 50-50. I should get as much as I give. No, actually, in happy relationships, both the man and the woman give
100%.
100%.
Ahsant.
They are focused on how to make the other person happy rather than what the other person is not doing to make them happy. It's a completely
Ahsant.
different mindset. So, and this is again, it's definitely both. Both have a role to play in this, and each,
Ahsant.
in every conflict, I tell both people that each of you have a choice to turn this conflict around. Each of you. And if you wait for the other person, keep waiting. Good luck. You're not going to be happy, but you can keep waiting, right?
Absolutely.
And in any moment, if one person is acting out or misbehaving or acting poorly, you don't have to follow them. You don't have to go down that path.
Exactly.
As long
Ahsant.
as you keep within your values and your circle of control and focus on that, it will actually encourage the other person to do the same. But the minute the blame game starts and, you should change first and you should do that, it's a recipe. It's a recipe for misery, right? Not for happiness.
In this era we live in, there's so many platforms, right? We talked about the apps and the websites that offer matrimonial services. So now let's say that we found someone that we're interested in and maybe we even like them, right? So when we're dating online, behind the screen, virtually, how soon should we introduce the families to one another? Should the parents be involved and informed right from the beginning, or we wait till we see if we can build compatibility first?
Okay, so I don't think there's an easy answer for every situation. If you've if you have been meeting, if you've been talking to many people and your parents are aware, for example, that you are on a dating website, okay, and that you are meeting people, maybe they don't have to be informed of every single person that you are potentially matched with and you have nothing in common with, right? That is one way to look at it. And again, the online dating world is a whole different conversation. Okay, I'm not at this point, we are not talking about the merits or demerits of it. Um, at the minimum, your parents should know that you are on this site, right? Because here's the thing: when you withhold information from people that you are close to, your parents, your spouse, whoever, it just breeds mistrust. So this is it's a big thing. From the parents' perspective, what happens is that coming to this age, and I'm at that age, right? When kids are looking to settle down, it's a very anxious time. It's an anxious time for the kids. It's a very anxious time for mothers in particular, and they they share their anxiety with their children all the time. So for example, if you've met somebody, you've been you have seen them or spoken to them once, the mothers are very known to be questioning the people all the time. What's happening, keep me updated. And this causes lots of anxiety all around. So the more the mother pushes, the more the child is backs off, right? And this is a very common scenario. So how to deal with that? First of all, obviously be upfront as much as you can, speaking to the child. Keep them informed before they have to ask you. So for example, if you are meeting people, it's a good idea to say, mom, I don't know where we stand right now. I haven't made a decision, but let's talk about it every couple of weeks or every month or however long you think. Let's don't ask me every time I have a conversation. Let's just keep aside a time. So you're actually preempting this, because if you don't do that, mother is always wondering what's going on with you, and you are always backing off. Right? But if you're actually upfront about it, say, yes, we're meeting and I'm not ready to make a decision, and you'll be the first one to know, and let's keep each other updated on what's happening, then it's a much healthier. You've like preempted a lot of the strife that may come about, right, as a result of this.
Got it. So while you're in that stage, you're still trying to figure out this person. A hadith comes to mind. Imam Ali, peace be upon him, says that you really don't know a person until you live with them, travel with them, or do business with them, right? So with that in mind, obviously living together is not an option. So we tend to send representatives of ourselves to our potential partners so that we can impress them. They may like us and all these things, right? So, and that prevents us from being real and honest with ourselves and with our potential partner. So, my question, I guess, is how can we be sure, right? Who's a fake one, who's pretending to be someone they're not? Are there tools basically that will help us, to navigate to weed out the fake ones from the real ones?
Hmm. Okay, so first of all, let's start with we send representatives. Okay, that's the Islamic recommendation. Okay, it is to go through an indirect means in the first instance. I'm not saying all the time, but
Oh,
in the first instance,
no,
right?
that's not what I meant. Not like a wakil or like that. Like send our representatives a version of us that's not real because we're pretending to
Oh,
be someone we're not. That's what I meant.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. So it depends, right? Are you showing up as your best self
mm, which
or
mostly
a fake
happens.
self? Two
Right.
different things, right?
Mm.
So again, and that's why we need to pace a growing attachment, right? We can't really, the first couple of times we meet somebody. So again, there are ways to get to know a person, and what do you pay attention to. Because very often we don't know what to pay attention to. We get, the filters we have are usually looks, their height, their, color of skin, they are job, degree, all of these things. And none of this, by the way, matters in long term well being. They're not predictive of marital happiness. Okay.
Mm.
So, what are some of the things that are predictive that you really should pay attention to? Again, we've already talked about family background. Right. So think of it as faces, getting to know the faces of someone. Okay. So the first F is family background. The second is attitudes and actions of conscience, or what we would call in spiritual terms, akhlaq. What is their behavior like? What are they? How developed is their internal moral guidance system? Are they kind to people when you go out for a meal with them? Are they kind to the staff? Do they thank the waiter when he brings them something? Or are they dismissive of anyone who doesn't who has no use for them, kind of thing, right? C is compatibility potential. So and compatibility, by the way, the biggest kind of compatibility that predicts happiness in a marriage is that of values. Do you share faith? Do you share values? Do you think the same similarly about how important family is, how important faith is, how you practice your how you practice your faith, right? And E in faces is examples of other relationships. So again, how do they get along with others, with their siblings, with their friends, with their co-workers? Do they have long-term friendships where people are, they are committed to them, they will do things for them, they feel valued by them, right? Those are good signs. They're really good signs of a person if they have strong relationships with other people. And then the S in faces is the skills for communication and relationship building, right? Communication, expression of affection, how you complain, how you behave when there's a conflict. And those things, by the way, are not that hard to learn. So in terms of everything, if a person meets all the other criteria, they're solid, they come, they have other things that you're looking for, they can learn how to express themselves. They can learn how, what your love language is, and how to express love to you. It's really not the end of the game. If they have a good conscience, for example, if they want to make their spouse happy, then it's easy to learn how, right? So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I love it. Faces. I love that. I remember that acronym. So just going back more into this question, especially in the online dating world or long distance relationship, right? While it is helpful to research the person, do your due diligence, and find out what you can about this person before you commit, where do you draw the line between being a stalker and Googling the person and just getting to know them? Are there any guidelines that we should adhere to?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have any clear guidelines, but in the days of in the World Wide Web, it would be silly not to do some basic background check. Uh, what is their presence on social media? What how do they show up on a Google search? What kind of stuff do they post? Who are they with? Those are just very basic things that I don't think. I don't know if anyone wouldn't do in today's world. Once you do that, though, obviously it tells you some things, but we also need to recognize that a social media account of a person is a very curated version of who they are. We don't post the yucky stuff of our lives. We obviously post,
The good thing.
the
Yeah.
good things, right? And so it's only the beginning. It certainly shouldn't be the end of it. And stalking, I'm not sure what that would get you, in the sense that if you are in relationship with a person, you don't need to stalk, right? You can actually ask them questions yourself, and see how they answer and how they respond and how you communicate. But a basic social media and Google search is, I would say, like a no-brainer. uh,
There's a lot of things that you said today, and I'm so grateful that you have said those things that I wish I had known before I got married. Because one of the things that is very common and normal in my culture is the arranged marriage, or sometimes even forced marriage. But that's not our topic today. I only mention that because when you're involved in that society where you have no preferences or anything like that, and you just marry whoever your parents choose for you. One of the things that's undermined, I think, or downplayed is the importance of mutual physical attraction, right? Um, that is something that's a big deal for me, important personally, but it's not definitely not the number one on the list. But it's important for me to be mutually attracted to the person you're spending the rest of your life with. And from my observation, it comes off as generally in the whole Muslim world, it's kind of downplayed or at least dismissed or not given enough emphasis, right? What are your 2 cents on this? Is that really just being shallow, or is that really important?
so very important question, and maybe in some cultures, right? My experience is that in some cultures, it's actually overemphasized. So where I come from, India, Pakistan, looks is extremely emphasized. When you are you are meeting someone, even if you look at ads, matrimonial ads that were published in the newspapers back in the day. I don't know if they still are or not, but they all ask for very similar thing. Tall is the number one thing. Tall, slim, and fair skinned. So these are, I would say that looks are actually even emphasized by the parents, not only by the potential person, right? And when we're talking about looks, the thing is, I definitely believe that you should pay attention to it, because the physical part of the relationship, physical intimacy is a very important part of a marriage relationship. Um, what is not that healthy is to have a very set and clear idea of what that would look like. So what I'm
Excellent.
saying is, be a little bit more open-minded.
Mm.
What we find young people focusing on is that they have a very strong list of criteria to meet before they will even meet the person, right? So they have to be tall. They have to be slim. They have to be fair skinned. They have to be, dress sizes. I mean, people specify dress sizes, that I'm not interested in anyone above a certain dress size. And I'm like, hello, that's
Wow.
going to change for sure. Right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
not a
Allah.
great thing to base your happiness, long term
Wow.
happiness, on what somebody's dress size is. And so, as long as you are a bit open minded and you are willing to meet the person, and, looks again grow on you, right?
Yeah.
So, even if they're not drop dead gorgeous that you believe right in the beginning, as long as there is some pleasantness, right? If you find them pleasant, and, again, personality is a big part of it, right? So I often ask people, when they're trying to make a decision, and my first question to them is, do you like them? Right? Do you actually enjoy spending time with them? Do they make you happy? Do they make you smile? When you think about them, do you do it with fondness? Those are really important things. One should not downplay them. Very often what I find is that people who have made their decisions based on like a set criteria and not paid attention to this, what does your heart say? They've just said that, he had a good job, and she had a, she met all the criteria. My mom loved her, everyone in the community loved her, and all of that. That's not enough. What do you think?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like, you have to get along with this person for the rest of your life, and yes, you will work at it, but you need you need a little bit of pilot light, right? A spark to get the fire going, at least.
Excellent. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So after all of these issues that it's we covered it, we addressed it, right? Now we're still finding the situation where we're not finding our partners, our soulmates, right? We're not finding that love we're looking for. And a lot of times it can become disappointing, demoralizing, and very draining and exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. It's kind of like looking for a job. You put in your resume, but you're not getting a call back, or they said we hired somebody else, and it's demoralizing. So, how do we continue with the search despite the disappointments? How do we cope with the rejections, even?
Yeah, that's an important question. And in fact, recently, I'm sure the recording must be somewhere, but we did a whole session on what was called the emotional roller coaster of finding a spouse, and we talked about many of these, the many aspects of this question. But to put it very briefly, first, to recognize that it's not you. The whole situation is stressful. Everyone finds it stressful, and for some people it's easier to be matched than others. And it's nothing that's wrong with you. It's an imperfect situation, right? It's an imperfect system. And whatever emotions you're going through, learn to be kind with yourself. Just be a friend to yourself through the process, right? And keep going with faith. It's not easy. You have to recognize that, again, it's not you. The situation is challenging, and You know, don't the only advice I would give is don't make it harder by engaging in self criticism. Right? That's actually going to just make it worse. Beating yourself up is going to make it worse. At the best you can, be kind, be compassionate to yourself. Focus on other aspects of your life that you do have some control over. This is something you don't have control over, right? You can certainly focus. You can do your best. You can meet people. You can learn relationship skills. You can do all of that, and at the end of the day, it's somebody else's decision as well. Even if you decide, the other person may or may choose not to, and that doesn't say anything about you. It's the nature of the game. you know it's People have weird reasons why they make decisions, and it may be absolutely nothing to do with you, and it's going to be hard to decipher why somebody chose against it. They may know, they may think they know, but generally those things are also can be unconscious, right? So just keep reminding yourself that, and keep in the game. That's your best, your best hope. And 100 people can say no to you. You only need one person, right, to say yes at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And bunch of du'as, inshallah. But we'll go ahead and end it on that note. Unless you have any final thoughts.
No, I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we did. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Well, Marzia, thank you so much. You have been an absolute delight to have on the show. I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future. But inshallah, but before we let you go, I do have one final question for you. What is your message to humanity?
Be kind to yourself and others.
Son, I love it. That's my message too. Uh, thanks. That's all for today. Thank you guys so much, and join us next week. And we will offer a platform that will enable you, inshallah, to find the right one for you, your soulmate, love, and all that good stuff, inshallah. And I pray to Allah that He blesses all of the singles of the world with righteous and compatible mates for our souls. Until then, this is your host, King Abu, saying so long, and remember to treat each other with kindness. Goodbye.